as we start this assessment of web development stuff, the question often comes up about what's appropriate in terms of using tutorial and example code in your own assessment. So I'm trying to clarify that. So it makes sense to sometimes be at least referring to example code on the internet. That's a normal thing to do. If, for example, you're making a carousel, it would be strange for me to expect you to memorize every single one of these classes and do it without looking it up. And once you've memorized all of once you've got to this page, well, probably you can just grab some of this code and paste it into your own page and then adapt it to your own needs. So that's actually fine to do that, so long as the actual adapting bit happens and you don't just copy and paste it in and then say, oh, we're done, that's all finished. The other problem is if it's perhaps a bit more complex than this, and this is something we see. So someone grabs some really nice component and they paste it into their page, but then it's not adapted, and I haven't got anything to mark then, because I'm marking your work, not what someone on the internet did that you copied into your page. So you need to make it your own one way or another. So finding relevant examples, adapting them to what your needs, very authentic and natural thing to do. But I often see some code that is not well controlled, it's not consistently used, and it feels much more like a student doesn't really understand what's going on and they're just sort of cobbling together a bunch of stuff and hoping that it works. I'm going to show you a couple of examples actually. These weren't done for assessment. These were a couple of years ago. Students were doing this as a practice task. And it kind of illustrates the slightly messy work that is a problem when it comes to handing it in for assessment. So the first thing that stands out for me here is that there's a real inconsistency in indentation, which isn't a problem in itself. But it is typically a bit of a red flag that the student has just copied and pasted from somewhere and not taken the trouble to properly manage their code afterwards. Other things that stand out for me, we're using WebKit here. Again, nothing wrong with using WebKit, but we don't teach that. It's for backwards compatibility mostly these days. And my strong feeling is the student did not know what these two lines did and just left them in possibly out of a slight case of laziness. These importance here, I've got a feeling these were copied and pasted from somewhere. Even if they weren't, it's not a good sign. We should try to avoid using that because it often just means that you were trying to make something work and you couldn't. Back to the inconsistency, the white space is a bit of a mess all over the place as we go down here. Got this not like any other that we've got all the way through. And down here we're using these flexes and these media queries. Got a pretty strong feeling the student was just taking some stuff that came with an example and pasted it in here. Then we've got a float left here mixing in with that flex. Yeah, it's not wrong necessarily, but this student, I can say fairly conclusively, did not have good control of their CSS and their code. Here's another similar example of a student who has done a lot of copy and paste and not taken the trouble to tidy it up and make sure they show them what's going on. So for example, we've got that same inconsistency of indentation and white space going on. Suddenly we've gone to caps here, not sure why, that's not very consistent. We've got an IMG, two separate styles. Why isn't this in here? You know, that's showing signs of copy and paste and not properly understanding. And then we get down here and there's a whole bunch of stuff going on, and I'm fairly certain the student did not know what was going on with this grid CSS or any of this other stuff down here. And then we've even got some copied stuff that just came with the copy paste when they did that. So I would really struggle to give a good mark to this as it currently stands. So that gives you a bit of a clue. So to recap then, I'm really looking for you to be able to have good control and understanding of your own code. You are welcome to find stuff and use it as a basis for what you do, but you need to make it yours. You need to own it, which means that you need to take out any junk. You need to be really consistent. Or one thing I wanted to mention as well is, like, quite often I see people throwing inline styles into their HTML. It suited the W3 Schools people to have an inline style because they didn't want to have a separate style sheet for this example. It doesn't suit us to have inline styles typically. And also 400 pixels, well, you've got to have a good reason for doing that. It worked well for their example here, but in a typical Bootstrap page, as soon as you start specifying the number of pixels of an element, it means that Bootstrap, it struggles to resize things as you change the window size. That's a bad sign as well. So if you were to copy and paste this, well, that's fine. Make sure your style goes into the style sheet. Make sure you think about sizing. You can use it, but you have to use it, control it, you have to understand it, and you have to adapt it to make it work for yourself. And that applies to all of your CSS, HTML, Bootstrap stuff.